It's Shirley and Sir Winston, and welcome to Kids Corner. Sir Winston had a question for me about something that we read out of the Bible, and it was from one of Jesus' parables, one of his stories. And the parable is a story that makes you think about something, and the parable is about the kingdom of heaven. And he said, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough. And Sir Winston wanted to know kind of what that meant and what yeast is. So I thought that maybe we would take some yeast and mix it through flour and see what happens. Join us for our adventure in the kitchen.
We are going to make rolls today that are going to be using yeast. And I've started gathering some of the ingredients together. I've already washed my hands, put on my new apron that I got for Christmas. Sir Winston has an apron on that belonged to my daughter, but he's trying not to get too close because he says it takes forever to get the flour out of his fur. So why don't I show you yeast? Now the yeast I bought comes in a bottle. Sometimes you can get it in packages, and our recipe needs 2 tablespoons of yeast. Let's see if I can bring it a little closer so that you can see it. It's really little tiny bits, and we're going to put it in our mixing bowl, but before we do that, it actually goes in with some warm water. Now I've already poured in 1 cup of water, and it needs 2 more, so that's 3 cups of warm water, not hot, warm. And we sprinkle 1 tablespoon and another tablespoon of yeast on top. And then we keep adding a few more things that I've measured out. We have 6 tablespoons of oil that we'll put in. We have 2 eggs that I've already cracked and beaten that we'll pour in. I've measured out 4 cups of flour that we'll put in. A teaspoon and a half of salt, and salt you can sometimes cut back in some of the recipes you make, but you should never cut back salt when you're using yeast. And 8 tablespoons of sugar, and sugar is also important when you're using yeast. Now, sometimes when you make things with yeast, you just have yeast, water, and sugar to start, but this has quite a few ingredients. And I've put, you'll notice there was a special hook. Well, I'll pop it up again so you can see. It's called a dough hook. It doesn't go all the way around on my mixer, and I'm just going to use it to mix this together. Okay, we're going to lift it up again. Kind of scrape down the sides and lift it just a little more. Think it has a good start at being mixed, and now we're going to add more flour to it. And this is where the recipes get a little less exact. They're saying 4 to 5 cups of flour. And so I'm going to reach into my flour dish. You can see flour in the air, so you know why Sir Winston tries to stay away. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll put a little bit more in the cup. But what we're going to do is let this mix with the dough hook, and this is going to take it a little longer to mix up. Now, when my mother made bread and rolls, when I was a little girl, she made it all by hand, but it's much easier to use a mixer. Now, I've stopped it. It's much more solid, but I can tell from the look of it, because it's quite sticky, that it's going to need some more flour, so I'm going to put some more in and turn it on again. So you may be able to see it's all one big clump now. So what I'm going to do is put some flour on my piece of the counter that I had made for doing things like this. And we put flour on because flour keeps it from sticking. And you may be able to tell this is really sticky. So certainly going to need more flour. In fact, I'm going to need some flour in my hands to get it off. So you see why Sir Winston is very happy to stay farther away from me in the kitchen. So I'm going to get some more flour from my flour container, and I'm going to put some flour over the top, and we're going to start the kneading process, which is kind of both working the flour through and working the dough, stretching the strands of it. And something like rolls likes a lot of kneading. Okay, I think I've finished kneading. Bring it over for you to have a look at. So see how it's gone from a real sticky dough that I couldn't touch without being stuck to it to something that's kind of relatively smooth. Now the next step of the recipe is to put it in a bowl. And pick a bowl like this, and we're going to cover the bowl and let it sit for 15 minutes, and I'm going to clean up some of the mess I made. There, covered up. Well, our 15 minutes are up. The kitchen's not quite clean, but let's see what's happened with this. I don't know if you can tell, but it's bigger than it was when it went in, and that's the thing about yeast, is it makes things rise. So the next part of this is we actually, and this is kind of fun, get to punch it down. And you can sort of see how it is there. And so the air that was kind of in it went out. And what we're going to do is cover it all up again, and we're going to leave it so that it's going to double in size. And this is actually where it likes to be, kind of somewhere warm. So before we started, I turned on the oven for just a few minutes to make it a little warm, not a lot warm, just a little warmer than the kitchen. And I'm going to tuck it in there. And I'm going to come back in probably about an hour and see what it looks like. Well, about an hour has passed, so why don't we reach in, get what we put in, and have a look. There, you can see that it has risen to about double in size. So our next step is to take it out of this, and we're going to start shaping it into rolls, which will rise again, and then we'll cook them. So we'll a little bit of flour back on this and lift out the dough. We've put a little bit of grease in that, and we'll shape them to little balls and put them next to one another. So we'll see you in a little while, because it's going to take me a while to get this done. Well, we're down to just the last bit of dough. So I think we're going to put these in a muffin tin, and we're going to make them with kind of 3 little humps in them. So what I do is I take a piece of dough and kind of put it pushing up with my finger, and then just pinching it in at the bottom to try to give it a smooth top. and then I put it with the little ball next to it. And what happens is those 3 little balls will grow together at the bottom and then puff out at the top. So we're just going to finish the rest of this dough, and we'll put the pans back in the oven and cover them up and let them have a second rising. So if you remember the story of Moses when the people were leaving Egypt, that they didn't have time for the bread to rise, so they had unleavened bread, bread that didn't rise. And so you can see that this takes a little while to rise. It takes a little while to cook. So if you're in a hurry, you're certainly not making bread that rises. So we're just going to tuck these away, and we'll be back in a little while to see how they're doing and pop them into the oven. As you can see, they finished their second rising, and they've filled in, and we're just waiting for the oven to finish heating up to temperature, which is 375 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've hit temperature, so we're putting in our rolls, and then we'll look for them to be somewhat brown on the top and hollow sounding underneath. So we'll see in about 20-25 minutes what they look. So I've just taken them out of the oven. They're probably a little more done than they need to be, and you can hear that hollow, and we'll wait for them to cool and see what they taste like. Well, our rolls have cooled, and Sir Winston and I are just getting ready to eat them. And if we think back, this all came about because of the parable that Jesus had told about the kingdom of heaven being like yeast that a woman needs into the flour. And we can see that when we did this, the pieces of yeast were so small, and we mixed them into the flour, and it was just a little bit of yeast and a lot of flour and water and other stuff. But that yeast worked even in ways that we couldn't see it work to make the bread dough go bigger and bigger until, it had risen a couple of times and we could form it into rolls and bake it. And that's a little like God and His Word, His message. It works in our heart, in other people's heart. And as they spread out, it's changed. It changes them, and by changing them, it helps change the world around them. So that is how the kingdom of heaven is yet like yeast. It comes from inside in workings that we can't see, and it grows. So in the meantime, Sir Winston and I plan to enjoy our roll, and we hope that maybe sometime you'll make some bread too with yeast. Take care, and we'll see you later at Kids Corner.